Have you ever felt a strange sense of protection during a moment of danger? Perhaps you narrowly avoided an accident that should have happened, or found comfort during your darkest hour from a source you couldn't quite identify. Maybe you've experienced a sudden intuition that saved you from disaster, or felt an inexplicable presence watching over you when you needed it most. These aren't coincidences. These aren't random occurrences. Throughout human history, across every culture and civilization, people have spoken of invisible helpers, beings of light and compassion who work silently behind the scenes to guide, protect, and assist humanity in ways we rarely understand. What if I told you that these helpers are not myths or superstitions, but actual realities operating according to natural laws we're only beginning to comprehend? What if the guardian angels of Christianity, the devas of Hinduism, the spirits honored by indigenous cultures worldwide are all pointing toward the same fundamental truth, that we are never truly alone, that help exists on planes of existence beyond our normal perception, and that love and compassion work through channels both visible and invisible? Today, we're going to explore something profound, something that will change how you see the world around you. We're going to examine real accounts of intervention, understand who these helpers are, discover how they work, and most importantly, learn how you yourself might join their ranks. Because here's the beautiful secret: you don't need to wait until death to become a helper. You don't need special powers or supernatural gifts. The capacity to assist others exists within you right now, waiting to be awakened and directed. Let's begin with the universal recognition of these helpers. Throughout recorded history, every civilization has acknowledged the existence of beings who assist humanity from beyond the physical plane. The ancient Greeks told stories of gods intervening in human affairs, guiding heroes through impossible challenges. Romans believed that Castor and Pollux led their armies to victory in crucial battles. Medieval Christians spoke of saints appearing at critical moments to turn the tide of war or save pious travelers from certain doom. Eastern traditions have always recognized the presence of helpful entities, giving them different names but understanding their fundamental nature. What's remarkable is that even in our modern, skeptical age, despite our scientific materialism and our tendency to dismiss anything we can't measure or prove, these experiences continue to happen. People still report inexplicable interventions. Children are still mysteriously saved from danger. The dying still describe being guided by loving presences. And perhaps most telling of all, these experiences follow consistent patterns, suggesting they arise not from imagination or wishful thinking, but from actual encounters with real forces operating according to comprehensible principles. Consider this remarkable case from London, not so long ago. A terrible fire broke out in a street near the harbor, completely destroying 2 houses. The flames gained such intensity before discovery that firefighters could barely contain them, let alone save the structures. They managed to rescue all the inhabitants except 2, an elderly woman who suffocated before they could reach her, and a 5-year-old child whose presence had been completely forgotten in the chaos and panic of evacuation. The child's mother had left him in the landlady's care while she traveled on business. Only after everyone else was safe did the landlady remember with horror the trust that had been given to her. The child was in an upper room, and the entire house was now engulfed in flames. It seemed hopeless, absolutely impossible to reach him. But one brave fireman decided to make the attempt anyway. Following detailed directions to the exact location of the room, he plunged into the smoke and fire. What he found defied all his years of experience. The room was ablaze, most of the floor already collapsed. But the fire had curved around the space in an utterly unnatural manner, leaving the corner where the child lay completely untouched. The very rafters supporting that fragment of floor were half burned away, yet somehow the child's little bed remained safe. The boy was terrified but physically unharmed. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The fireman distinctly and repeatedly declared that as he made his way toward the child, risking his life with every step, he saw a form bending over the bed. Something all gloriously white and silvery, he said, smoothing down the bedclothes. He watched this luminous figure for several moments in the glare of the fire. It disappeared only when he came within a few feet of it. There was no possibility of mistake, no chance of hallucination in those intense moments of danger and focus. Meanwhile, miles away in another city, the child's mother couldn't sleep. She was constantly troubled by an overwhelming feeling that something was desperately wrong with her son. The anxiety grew so intense that she finally rose and spent considerable time in earnest prayer, begging that her child be protected from whatever danger she sensed hanging over him. Her maternal intuition, that deep soul connection between mother and child, had somehow perceived across the distance that her baby needed help. What happened here? A religious person might call it an answered prayer, an angel sent by God. And in a sense, they wouldn't be wrong. But understanding it more completely, we might say that the mother's intense outpouring of love and desperate concern created a powerful force, a living energy of protection that one of these invisible helpers was able to use, to direct, to channel into physical manifestation for the rescue of her child. The love was real. The danger was real. The intervention was real. And the helper who facilitated it was real. This pattern appears again and again. 3 small children were walking with their nurse along a river path when they encountered a horse pulling a barge. In the confusion, 2 of them were knocked into the water. The boatman who witnessed the accident sprang forward to save them, and he noticed something extraordinary. The children were floating unnaturally high in the water, moving calmly toward the bank as if being guided by invisible hands. That's all the adults saw. But the children told a different story. They both described a beautiful person, all white and shining, who stood beside them in the water, held them up, and guided them safely to shore. And they weren't alone in this vision. The bargeman's young daughter, who ran from the cabin when she heard the screaming, also saw this lovely lady in the water, pulling the children to safety. 3 separate witnesses, all describing the same luminous presence that appeared in their moment of desperate need. Or consider the story of 2 young brothers whose mother had recently died. One day, playing in the dark passages of an old mansion, they were suddenly confronted by the figure of their mother. She appeared before them clearly and told them to go back, then vanished. Confused and shaken, they obeyed. Investigation revealed that just a few steps ahead lay an uncovered well, deep and dangerous. If they had continued running forward, they would almost certainly have fallen to their deaths. Their mother, watching from beyond death itself, had manifested to save them from harm. These stories share common elements. The intervention comes at moments of genuine danger. Those who are helped often describe luminous or angelic figures. The manifestations are brief but perfectly timed. Children seem particularly receptive to seeing these helpers. And often, though not always, there's a connection of love, someone praying or thinking intensely about the person in danger. But who are these helpers? Where do they come from? How do they work? To understand this, we need to expand our concept of reality beyond the merely physical. We need to recognize that consciousness doesn't depend on having a physical body, that awareness continues after death, and that there are developed human beings who can function consciously on planes of existence that most of us experience only unconsciously during sleep or after death. The helpers come from several sources. Sometimes they are those who have recently died, particularly parents watching over their children with a love so intense it transcends the boundaries between life and death. Mother love is one of the most powerful forces in existence, and it doesn't cease simply because the mother no longer has a physical body. She continues to watch, to care, to protect as long as she's able to maintain contact with the earthly plane. Sometimes the helpers are what we might call nature spirits, beings from a different evolutionary stream than humanity, though these cases are relatively rare. More often, the work is done by living human beings, men and women who have developed the ability to function consciously in their subtle bodies while their physical forms sleep. These are students of the deeper mysteries of life, people who have trained themselves to assist others not just during their waking hours, but throughout the night as well. And sometimes, though rarely, the helpers are those great adepts, the masters of wisdom who have perfected themselves through countless incarnations and now dedicate their vast powers to the service of humanity. But such beings work primarily on higher planes, influencing the true spiritual nature of humanity rather than intervening in physical emergencies. When they do work on lower levels, it's usually through their students, training and guiding those who are learning to help. Think about what this means for a moment. Right now, As you go about your daily life, there are people sleeping whose consciousness is active on other planes, working to assist those in need. Tonight, when you fall asleep, your own consciousness leaves your physical body and enters realms where help can be given and received. Most people remain in a dreamlike state, absorbed in their own thoughts, barely aware of the rich reality around them. But some have learned to wake up in these other dimensions, to work consciously, to extend aid to those who need it. And this is where the story becomes personal for you. Because you have this capacity within you. You might not be using it yet. You might not even be aware of it. But the potential exists in every human being to become a helper, to join this invisible army of compassion that works ceaselessly for the benefit of all. How does one develop this capacity? It begins with understanding that you are not your physical body. Your body is a vehicle, a temporary home for consciousness, but it's not what you fundamentally are. Every night when you sleep, you partially separate from it. The real you, the conscious essence that thinks and feels and perceives, slips out of the dense physical form and operates in a subtler body made of finer matter. For most people, this separation happens unconsciously. They fall asleep in the physical body and remain mostly asleep in the subtle body as well, drifting in dreams, absorbed in their own mental creations, barely aware of the actual environment around them. They're like sleepwalkers moving through a world of wonders without seeing any of it. But this state isn't permanent or unchangeable. It's possible to wake up, to become fully conscious and active while the physical body rests. This awakening doesn't happen by accident. It requires intention, effort, and certain qualities of character. Why character? Because consciousness on these other planes brings with it abilities that could be dangerously misused by someone with selfish motives or poor self-control. Imagine being able to read thoughts, to influence minds, to move through space instantly, to perceive events at a distance. In the hands of someone driven by anger, greed, or desire for power, such abilities would be catastrophic. So before anyone is deliberately awakened to full consciousness on these planes, they must demonstrate certain qualities. They must have developed strong self-control, particularly over anger and irritation. On the subtle planes, thought is far more powerful than here. An angry thought directed at someone could cause them serious harm. So the aspiring helper must be someone who has mastered their temper, who can encounter disturbing or offensive things without losing their equilibrium. They must also have courage. The planes beyond physical existence contain many things that appear strange or frightening to those unaccustomed to them. Forms and beings unlike anything in earthly experience exist there. The helper must have the courage to face these without panic, to understand that in their subtle body they cannot be harmed by anything they encounter, no matter how terrifying it might appear. Calmness is essential. The work often involves soothing those who are disturbed, comforting those in fear, bringing peace to troubled minds. How can you calm others if your own energy is vibrating with anxiety and worry? The helper must be someone who has moved beyond the modern habit of constant worrying, who has learned to meet life's challenges with serenity and trust in the larger pattern of existence. Knowledge is necessary. You can't help effectively if you don't understand the environment you're working in or the nature of the beings you're trying to assist. This is why study is so important for the aspiring helper. Not dry, academic study for its own sake, but the eager acquisition of understanding about the structure of consciousness, the nature of existence beyond death, the forces that operate on subtler planes. But above all, what's needed is genuine, selfless love. Not sentimental emotion or conditional affection, but that deep recognition that all beings are fundamentally connected, that their welfare is inseparable from your own, that service to others is the highest purpose of existence. This love isn't something you can fake or force. It grows naturally from understanding, from seeing the underlying unity of all life, from recognizing the divine spark in every being. When these qualities are present, when someone has developed sufficient self-control, courage, calmness, knowledge, and love, they become eligible for deliberate awakening on the subtle planes. This awakening is usually performed by someone who is already working there consciously, someone who can assess whether the candidate is truly ready and then help them make the transition from unconscious dreaming to conscious activity. But here's something important to understand: you don't have to wait for full conscious awakening to begin helping. Even now, in your current state of development, you can do something significant. Every night before you fall asleep, you can form a strong, clear intention to go and help someone you know who is in need. You can visualize them, hold them in your heart, and mentally declare your wish to assist them in whatever way is possible and appropriate. When you do this with sufficient intensity, your consciousness when freed from the physical body will carry out that intention. You might not remember it in the morning. You might have no conscious awareness of what you did. But the help will be given. The person you thought of will receive benefit from your effort. And gradually, over time, this practice will strengthen your ability to function consciously on those planes. You can also help during your waking hours through the power of thought. Thoughts are real things, living forces that travel through space and affect their targets. When you think of someone with genuine love and goodwill, when you send them positive, healing, uplifting thoughts, those thoughts actually reach them and influence them for good. You're creating beneficial energy that surrounds them, supports them, strengthens them. This isn't wishful thinking or pleasant fantasy. It's practical metaphysics, the application of natural laws that operate on levels beyond the physical. Every kind thought you send out is a force for good in the world. Every moment you spend holding someone in loving awareness, you're helping them in a real and tangible way, even if neither of you is consciously aware of it. So you see, the work of the invisible helpers isn't something remote from your life, something only specially gifted people can do. It's an opportunity available to everyone who cares enough to develop the necessary qualities and put forth the effort. You can begin tonight. You can start right now by choosing to think more carefully about the thoughts you send out, by developing greater control over your emotions, by studying to increase your understanding, by cultivating genuine compassion for all beings. The helpers work on many levels and in many ways. Some focus on protecting people from physical danger, as in the stories we've examined. Others work primarily with those who have recently died, helping them understand their new condition, comforting them, guiding them toward higher states. Still others focus on mental and spiritual assistance, putting helpful thoughts into receptive minds, inspiring artists and teachers, counteracting negative influences. As someone develops in this work, their sphere of usefulness expands. Instead of helping only individuals, they learn to assist groups, communities, even nations. They're shown how to work with larger forces, how to take advantage of favorable cycles, how to cooperate with beings from other evolutionary streams in the great work of advancing consciousness throughout the world. This is the magnificent vista that opens before anyone who seriously commits to the path of service. It's not easy. It requires dedication, persistence, the willingness to face and overcome your own limitations. But it's also the most rewarding, fulfilling, meaningful way to live. Because ultimately, we're not separate individuals struggling alone through an indifferent universe. We're all connected, all part of one vast family, and helping each other is both our highest joy and our deepest purpose. The stories of miraculous interventions we've explored are not meant to make you passive, waiting for helpers to save you from every difficulty. They're meant to show you what's possible, to open your eyes to dimensions of reality you might not have considered, and most importantly, to inspire you to become a helper yourself. Because the world desperately needs more helpers. The suffering is vast. The need is urgent. And everyone who awakens to conscious service on these higher planes makes a difference far beyond what they might imagine. So tonight, before you sleep, take a moment. Think of someone you know who is struggling, suffering, in need of comfort or guidance. Hold them in your heart with genuine love. Form the clear intention to help them in whatever way is possible. Then let go and trust that your consciousness, when freed from your sleeping body, will do what it can. And during your waking hours, commit yourself to developing the qualities that will make you an ever more effective helper. Work on your self-control. Practice remaining calm under pressure. Study to increase your understanding. Most of all, cultivate that selfless love that sees the divine in everyone and wants nothing more than to serve. This is how the invisible helpers are trained. This is how the work is done. And this is the invitation being extended to you right now, to join this noble company, to become part of something far greater than yourself, to discover that in serving others, you find your own deepest fulfillment and highest purpose. We've explored the reality of invisible helpers and the miraculous interventions that prove their existence. We've seen how these beings work, who they are, and how even you can begin joining their ranks. Now we need to go deeper, to understand the mechanics of this work, to explore what happens to those who need help after death, and to chart the path that leads from being an ordinary person to becoming a fully conscious helper working on planes beyond the physical. Let's begin by understanding something crucial about the nature of assistance itself. Many people worry that if they try to help someone, they might be interfering with that person's karma, disrupting the natural consequences that are meant to teach important lessons. This concern reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how karma actually works. The great cosmic law is not some fragile mechanism that can be disrupted by your well-meaning efforts. It's infinitely more sophisticated and powerful than that. If someone's karma is such that they cannot be helped, then all your efforts to help them will simply fail. You'll find yourself unable to reach them, or your intervention won't have the effect you intended. But you will have gained positive karma for yourself by making the attempt. Your intention to help, your compassion and effort, these create beneficial consequences for you regardless of the outcome. Conversely, if the person can be helped, if your intervention succeeds, that success itself demonstrates that their karma permitted it. Perhaps they had just exhausted the period of difficulty they needed to experience. Perhaps their past good actions had earned them the right to receive assistance at this moment. What you're actually doing when you help is not overriding karma, but fulfilling it. You become the instrument through which their good karma manifests. The law takes care of itself with perfect precision. Your job is simply to offer help whenever you can, to whoever needs it, and trust that the deeper intelligence governing existence will determine what results from your effort. Never hold back from trying to help someone because you fear you might be interfering with cosmic justice. That's not your concern. Your concern is to act with compassion whenever the opportunity arises. Now let's examine more closely the nature of the helpers themselves and the work they do. We've mentioned that some help comes from those who have recently died, especially parents watching over their children. This happens more often than you might think, though it's important to understand the limitations involved. When someone dies, they don't immediately ascend to some distant heaven far removed from earthly concerns. For a time, often quite extended, they remain on what we call the astral plane, a level of existence that interpenetrates and surrounds the physical world. During this period, especially in the earlier stages, the deceased person can still perceive events on Earth, can still be aware of their loved ones, can still be affected by earthly attachments and concerns. A mother who dies leaving young children doesn't suddenly forget them. Her love continues, perhaps even intensifies, freed from the limitations of physical exhaustion and daily distractions. She watches over them, yearns to protect them, tries desperately to make her presence known. The problem is that most people after death find themselves in a strange predicament. They're fully conscious, often more so than during physical life, but they lack the knowledge and skill to effectively interact with the physical plane they've left behind. It's like suddenly finding yourself on the other side of a glass wall, able to see and hear your loved ones but unable to make them see or hear you. This causes tremendous frustration and grief for many who have passed. However, when danger threatens someone they love, when the emotional intensity reaches a certain pitch, the deceased person's desperate desire to help can sometimes give them the power to manifest, to make themselves visible and audible, at least for a moment. This is especially true when the living person is also in a heightened emotional state, when their consciousness is somewhat loosened from the normal physical focus by fear or need. In such moments, the barrier between the worlds becomes thinner, and contact becomes possible. But these instances are relatively rare. Most of the departed, even those with the strongest desire to help, find themselves unable to effectively intervene in physical events. Moreover, those who are most spiritually developed, those with the least attachment to material things and earthly concerns, are precisely those who move most quickly beyond the astral plane into higher states where connection with the physical world becomes increasingly difficult. The very selflessness and spiritual advancement that would make someone an ideal helper also draws them upward, away from the realm where physical help can be given. This is why the bulk of the helping work falls to living people who have learned to function consciously on the astral plane while their physical bodies sleep. These helpers have enormous advantages. They understand both worlds, physical and astral. They can move freely between them. They have been trained in the techniques needed to manifest or influence physical events when necessary. And they work under the guidance of teachers who have perfected these skills over many lifetimes. The work these helpers do among the recently deceased is vast and incredibly important. To understand why, we need to grasp just how confused and frightened most people are when they first find themselves on the astral plane after death. In the Western world especially, religious teachings have done tremendous damage by filling people's minds with terrifying expectations that bear no resemblance to reality. Imagine you've been taught all your life that death leads either to eternal heaven or eternal hell. You've been told that unless you're among a tiny elect of perfect souls, you're destined for endless torture and flames. Then you die and find yourself in a strange twilight condition, neither in the glorious heaven you hoped for nor in the hell you feared, but in something altogether different and unexpected. What would your state of mind be? For many, it's absolute terror. They're convinced that at any moment this temporary reprieve will end and they'll be plunged into the eternal punishment they've been taught to expect. They live in constant anxiety, unable to understand where they are or what's happening to them. Some refuse to believe they're dead at all, insisting this must be a dream or hallucination, because what they're experiencing doesn't match what their religion told them death would be like. Others are paralyzed by guilt. They've been taught that they're inherently sinful, fundamentally unworthy, deserving of punishment. Even though nothing terrible is happening to them, they interpret every uncomfortable sensation, every unsettling sight, as the beginning of the damnation they've been promised. Their own fear and guilt create mental prisons far more restrictive than any actual limitation of the astral plane. This is where the helpers do some of their most valuable work. They seek out these frightened, confused souls and offer them comfort, explanation, and guidance. They help them understand that the universe is governed not by the whims of a capricious deity but by benevolent law. They explain that there is no eternal punishment, no vindictive God gleefully consigning souls to torment. They describe the actual nature of the astral plane, the process of gradual purification and ascent that awaits them, the glorious heaven world they'll eventually reach. Often this work requires great patience. People cling stubbornly to their religious programming even when it's making them miserable. They argue, they resist, they insist that the helper must be a demon trying to deceive them. But gradually, with repeated contact, with gentle persistence, with demonstrations of genuine compassion, most can be brought to a calmer, more reasonable state of mind. The helpers also work with those who are earthbound not by religious fear but by attachment and anxiety. A man dies leaving his family unprovided for, and his constant worry about them keeps him chained to the earthly plane long past when he should have moved on. A woman dies with some important duty unfulfilled, and her sense of obligation prevents her from ascending to higher levels. A person dies suddenly, violently, with affairs in disorder, and the mental agitation keeps them trapped in the lower astral regions. In such cases, the helper's work might involve more than just counseling the deceased person. Sometimes it requires taking action on the physical plane on their behalf. There are documented cases of helpers tracking down separated family members, conveying messages, even settling business affairs for the deceased so that their minds could be put at ease and they could continue their upward journey. Consider this account: a helper was trying to assist a man who had died leaving 2 young children without support. The man's wife had died earlier, and though the landlady was kind, she was too poor to keep the children. They would have to go to the parish, essentially becoming orphans in an institution. The father's anguish over this kept him bound to earth, unable to move on. The helper asked if there were any relatives who might help. The father mentioned a younger brother he'd lost touch with 15 years earlier, last known to be an apprentice carpenter in the north. The clues were minimal, but the helper decided to search. Taking the deceased man along, traveling in their astral bodies, they began a patient investigation. After considerable effort, they found the brother, now a master carpenter with a successful business, married but childless. The next challenge was making the living brother aware of the situation. The helper repeatedly impressed the circumstances upon the man's mind during sleep, creating vivid dreams about his deceased brother and the children in need. The dreams were so detailed and recurring that the carpenter became convinced something was real about them, but he hesitated to act on what might be mere fantasy. Finally, the helper took a bold step. Using physical means, a letter was arranged to be sent to the carpenter, detailing exactly what he'd seen in his dreams. This confirmation spurred him to immediate action. He traveled to the town, found the children, and took them into his home, giving them the loving family they desperately needed. Only then, his anxiety relieved, could the father continue his spiritual ascent. This illustrates several important principles. First, the helpers work within natural law, not by violating it. They didn't magically transport the children or make money appear from nowhere. They worked through human agency, through natural means, influencing minds, and facilitating communication. Second, they often work patiently through multiple attempts, not giving up when the first approach fails. Third, their compassion extends to solving practical problems, not just offering spiritual comfort. Another major category of work among the dead involves those who are so absorbed in earthly consciousness that they don't realize they're dead at all. This happens more often than you might imagine, especially among materialists who believe death meant extinction of consciousness. When they find themselves still conscious after death, their minds simply cannot process this information in a way that makes sense to them. So they convince themselves they're still alive, that they're having some kind of prolonged and unpleasant dream, that they'll wake up soon in their familiar bed. These people can be very difficult to help because they resist any explanation that contradicts their conviction that they're still physically alive. One documented case involved a scientist who had died but insisted he was merely experiencing hallucinations. A helper who had been the son of the scientist's old friend was assigned to assist him. The scientist admitted he was bewildered and uncomfortable, but he clung to his dream hypothesis as the only materialist-compatible explanation for his condition. The young helper offered to prove he was real by bringing a message from his father. The scientist agreed this would constitute evidence. The message was obtained and delivered, referring to events that had occurred before the helper's birth, proving it couldn't have been read from the helper's own memories. This convinced the scientist, and once convinced, his scientific mind immediately wanted to understand this new realm he found himself in. The instruction he then received transformed his entire perspective and will influence not only his current state but his next incarnation as well. What's crucial to understand is that all this helping work among the dead has lasting consequences. You might think that since the dead person will eventually be reborn with no conscious memory of what they learned on the astral plane, the help given there is somehow wasted. But this is completely wrong. Memory exists at multiple levels. Even when the surface personality forgets, the deeper self retains everything. When someone is taught truth on the astral plane, when they're helped to understand the real nature of existence, when they're guided toward higher consciousness, all of that becomes part of their permanent inner knowledge. In their next life, when they encounter these teachings again, they'll recognize them immediately at a soul level. They'll have a strong predisposition to accept and understand them. The seeds planted by the helpers bear fruit across lifetimes. Now let's turn our attention to the living. How do helpers assist those who are still in physical bodies? Much of this work happens through what might be called mental or spiritual suggestion. This doesn't mean forcing thoughts into people's minds or controlling them in any way. Such manipulation would be completely unethical and would violate the helper's code. Instead, it means gently placing helpful thoughts where they can be naturally picked up and adopted by someone who is receptive. Think of it like this: your mind is constantly flooded with thoughts. Some arise from your own mental processes, but many drift in from the collective mental atmosphere around you, from other people's thinking, from accumulated thought forms in your environment. The helpers add to this stream beneficial thoughts, ideas that might help you solve a problem you're wrestling with, perspectives that might comfort you in sorrow, insights that might guide you toward truth. Whether you pick up these thoughts and make them your own depends entirely on you. The helpers can offer, but they cannot compel. If you're receptive, if you're genuinely seeking an answer or open to new understanding, their suggested thought will resonate with something in you. You'll seize upon it, develop it, act on it. And it will feel completely like your own idea, which in a sense it is, because you chose to accept and develop it. But the seed came from outside, from a helper who saw your need and responded to it. This kind of assistance is given far more widely than the dramatic physical interventions we talked about earlier. Thousands upon thousands of people receive helpful thoughts every day without having any idea where they came from. Someone struggling with a difficult decision suddenly has a moment of clarity. Someone grieving inconsolably feels a wave of inexplicable peace. Someone searching for truth has an insight that changes their entire worldview. In many of these cases, a helper has been at work. The helpers also respond to prayer, though perhaps not in the way most people imagine. When you pray earnestly for help, for guidance, for strength to endure difficulty, you create a powerful spiritual force. That force itself produces results according to natural law. But it also creates an opening, an opportunity for the powers of good to pour through additional assistance. The helpers often serve as channels for this assistance, becoming the means by which your prayer is answered. Artists, writers, musicians, and teachers frequently receive inspiration from the helpers. When someone is genuinely trying to create something beautiful or true, when they're struggling to find the right words or images to express an important idea, helpers with the necessary knowledge and skill will often suggest thoughts, themes, or approaches. Of course, the artist must be capable of receiving and executing these suggestions. The helper can't make someone a great writer if they haven't developed their craft. But they can offer that flash of inspiration, that perfect image or phrase, that transforms good work into great work. There are also more advanced and specialized forms of helping work, though these are accessible only to those with considerable development. Some helpers work with entire groups, communities, or nations, learning to wield forces that affect large numbers of people simultaneously. Others work on the mental plane rather than the astral, operating on even higher levels where the effects are more subtle but also more far-reaching and permanent. As a helper progresses, as their knowledge and power increase, they're gradually entrusted with greater responsibilities. They learn to cooperate with advanced beings from other evolutionary streams. They're shown how to work with cyclic forces, taking advantage of favorable astrological or cosmic influences to accomplish things that wouldn't be possible at other times. Eventually, they become capable of truly significant work, contributing to the great plan that guides the evolution of consciousness on our planet. But all of this begins with simple, humble service. It begins with the sincere desire to help others and the willingness to develop the qualities that make helping possible. What are these qualities? We've touched on them before, but let's examine them more systematically now, because understanding what's required is the first step toward developing it. First comes single-mindedness. You must recognize that helping others, serving the greater good, is the most important thing you can do with your life. This doesn't mean neglecting your ordinary responsibilities. Those are karmic obligations that must be fulfilled. But it means that behind and beyond all your worldly activities, there's this deeper purpose, this commitment to service that gives meaning to everything else. Second is self-control, particularly control of anger and irritation. On the subtle planes, thought is tremendously powerful. An angry thought directed at someone can cause them serious harm. Before you can be safely entrusted with the enhanced powers available on those levels, you must demonstrate that you won't misuse them in moments of emotional reaction. You must be someone who has mastered your temper so thoroughly that nothing you encounter can shake your inner equilibrium. This also means control of fear. You'll encounter many strange and potentially frightening things on the astral plane. Beings unlike anything in earthly experience, situations that would terrify someone unprepared, illusions designed to test your courage. You must develop unshakable bravery, the absolute certainty that in your subtle body nothing can actually harm you, no matter how terrifying it appears. Third is calmness, the absence of worry and depression. How can you bring peace to troubled minds if your own energy field vibrates with constant anxiety? How can you comfort the sorrowful if you're wrapped in your own gloom? The helper must be someone who has transcended the modern habit of manufacturing problems, someone who meets life's challenges with serene confidence in the underlying goodness and purpose of existence. Fourth is knowledge. You can't help effectively if you don't understand the environment you're working in or the nature of the beings you're trying to assist. This requires serious study, not casual reading but deep engagement with teachings about consciousness, life after death, the structure of subtle planes, the forces that operate there. The more you know, the more useful you can be. Fifth is unselfishness, the complete absence of personal ambition or desire for recognition in this work. You're not seeking to accumulate powers for your own benefit or to gain a reputation as someone special. You're offering yourself as an instrument of service, willing to work anonymously, content to help without any expectation of thanks or acknowledgement. Until selfishness is thoroughly rooted out, you're not ready for the greater powers. And sixth, most important of all, is love. Not sentimentality or emotional gushing, but genuine compassion, the deep recognition that all beings are connected, that their welfare and yours are inseparable, that service is both the highest joy and the deepest purpose of existence. This love must be strong enough to act, not just to feel. It must be patient enough to persist through difficulties. It must be wise enough to know when to help and how, what to do and what to refrain from doing. These qualities aren't developed overnight. For most people, they're the work of many lifetimes. But everyone can begin where they are, working with what they have. Every effort to control your temper makes you more fit for helping work. Every time you choose calm over worry, you strengthen that quality in yourself. Every hour spent in genuine study increases your knowledge. Every act of selfless service develops your capacity for love. And you don't have to wait until you're perfect to begin helping. Even now, with whatever development you currently have, you can do something valuable. Before sleep tonight, form a clear intention to help someone you know who needs it. During your waking hours, send loving, supportive thoughts to those who are struggling. Practice thinking of others more and yourself less. These simple acts begin to reshape your consciousness, preparing you for greater service ahead. The path of the helper is also the path of spiritual development, the path that leads ultimately to the heights of human achievement, to that perfected state where one becomes a master of wisdom, capable of vast service to humanity. This path has been mapped out by those who have traveled it before. It has distinct stages, each with its own requirements and rewards. The early stages involve developing the fundamental qualities we've discussed: discrimination between the eternal and the temporary, control of mind and emotion, tolerance, endurance, faith in the process and in your own divine potential. These aren't just abstract virtues. They're practical capacities that make advanced spiritual work possible. As you progress, as these qualities strengthen in you, you eventually reach a point where you're ready for a definite commitment, ready to pledge yourself formally to the path of accelerated development under the guidance of one of the masters. This is a solemn moment, a turning point in your evolution. You're no longer just drifting along with the general tide of human progress. You're choosing to move faster, to work harder, to reach in this lifetime what might otherwise take many more incarnations. The pledged disciple receives direct teaching and guidance. They're shown how to work more effectively on the subtle planes. They're given increasingly responsible tasks. And they face tests, challenges designed to strengthen their weaknesses and prove their readiness for advancement. These tests aren't arbitrary or cruel. They're precise, scientific assessments of whether the person has truly developed the qualities claimed, or whether those qualities are merely intellectual concepts not yet integrated into their actual being. As the disciple passes through these stages, certain fetters that bind human consciousness must be progressively eliminated. The delusion of separate selfhood must be transcended. Doubt about the fundamental nature of reality must be replaced with direct knowledge. Superstitious dependence on external rituals must give way to inner strength. Attachment to sensory pleasures must be outgrown. Pride must be abandoned. Every trace of anger, irritability, and ignorance must be thoroughly removed. This is tremendously demanding work. It can take several lifetimes even for a dedicated student. But the rewards are correspondingly magnificent. Each stage brings expanded consciousness, increased power to serve, deeper understanding of the mysteries of existence. And eventually, the perfected one emerges, the adept, the master of wisdom, who has finished the course that all humanity must eventually complete, but even this is not the end. Beyond individual perfection lie choices, different paths of further evolution, different forms of service to the great plan. Some choose to remain closely involved with humanity, incarnating among us, working as teachers and guides. These are the masters from whom students of the deeper mysteries receive instruction and direction. Others work from higher planes, no longer incarnating physically but wielding vast spiritual forces that influence the development of consciousness throughout the world. Still others move on to entirely different evolutionary streams, taking their perfected capacities into realms beyond our comprehension. But whatever path they choose, all are engaged in service, all dedicate their transcendent powers to the welfare of others, because they understand that this is the fundamental nature of reality. We are all one, and in serving others we serve our truest self. This magnificent vision is not meant to discourage you by its seeming distance from your current state. It's meant to inspire you, to show you what you're capable of becoming, to demonstrate that the universe is far vaster and more wonderful than our limited perceptions suggest. You are not a helpless creature struggling through a meaningless existence. You are a developing God, treading a path that leads to unimaginable heights, with helpers surrounding you at every stage, ready to assist when you're ready to receive their aid. And you can begin that journey right now. Not someday, not when you're more ready, but now. Choose one person to hold in loving thought tonight. Commit to working on one of these essential qualities, perhaps patience or self-control. Start studying earnestly about the deeper nature of existence. Take one small step on the path of service. The invisible helpers are real. The work they do is real. The path to joining them is real. And the opportunity being offered to you is real. All that remains is your decision. Will you accept the invitation? Will you begin the training? Will you commit yourself to becoming a helper? The world desperately needs more conscious workers on these higher planes. Suffering is vast. Confusion is widespread. Fear and ignorance hold billions in their grip. Every person who awakens to conscious service makes an enormous difference. Your contribution matters. Your development serves not just yourself but all beings. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, remember, you are not just your physical body. You are consciousness itself, capable of working on multiple planes, of helping in ways you've never imagined. Form your intention clearly. Offer yourself for service. And trust that on levels beyond your current awareness, help is being given, growth is happening, and you are gradually becoming what you were always meant to be, a conscious channel for the infinite love and wisdom that sustains all existence. The invisible helpers await your joining them. The path is open. The invitation is extended. What will you choose?